Next we'll talk about cross-cut alignment and adjusting the arm if it's out of square. You'll need a square, a carpenter's square, a small speed square will work. You won't get as much blade travel with this, and then a really small square also, so we can check the perpendicular to the tabletop. You'll want to remove the blade guard. And first you'll take the short end of the square, you'll put it inside the tabletop, holding it tight to the fence. Then we're going to pull the blade out and see how it travels along the edge of the square. It should run right up against the edge of the square all the way out, full pull on the saw. If there are any adjustments that need to be made, you're going to make those on the rear on the miter latch. There's 2 adjustment screws. Loosen the set screws and adjust both sets or adjustment screws to get that arm to move whichever direction is needed. Next, we'll check 90-degree square to the tabletop. So you'll take your square, put it in on the flat surface of the table, and pull the arm out. Checking for perpendicular to the tabletop, ensuring that the blade is straight through all the way up the side of the square. If that does need adjustment, it's done on the front of the yoke with these 3 double lock bolts. Next, we check the roller head adjustment. If there's any looseness in the carriage when you did your initial check, when you pulled the roller head bearings, the 2 to adjust are on the left-hand side. You remove the end cap, and front and back on the left-hand side are your cam adjusting pins, eccentric pins, and that's where that adjustment's done. Next, we check for toe. To check for the toe of the blade, that is the blade not sitting perfectly true. It'd be kicked off to an angle, meaning your kerf would be wider when you cut. Instead of an 1/8 inch, it'd be wider. And that is done on the rear of the motor. So the toe adjustment refers to the plane of the blade and the fact that the front edge and the back edge of the blade must be traveling in the same plane. It's an easy check. You'd elevate it up, cut part way through the board, and you're going to measure that cut path in the board, ensuring it's the same width as the kerf of your teeth, the width of your teeth on your blade. Or checking for splinters on either side of the cut. If they're splintering on the right side of the cut, it indicates that the rear of the blade is slightly to the right of the front edge of the blade. To correct this, you simply adjust using the top 2 adjustment bolts on the rear trunnion. You loosen your lock nuts and loosen the left one and tightening the right one slowly to move the blade ever so slightly to the left. Then tighten the lock nuts and retest the cut. Repeat until if necessary. Roller head bearing adjustment would be on the front and the rear on the left-hand side of your carriage. These are eccentric pins. You loosen the set screw front and back. And with a short stubby set or Allen wrench, you would adjust these 2 cam bearings to take up the slack in the roller head. Next, we'll check the spring carriage return for adjustment. Once the roller head is adjusted and the carriage is able to pull freely, we want to make sure that the spring return pulls the carriage all the way to the rear. If it needs to get tighter, make some slack in the cable and put another wrap around the spring. And then check the pull. If it's too tight, do the same thing but in reverse. This time we'll pull the cable out and take a wrap off the spring. Following that, we'll check the bevel stop. The bevel stop needs to have the bumper installed to take the shock from the carrier turning so hard it doesn't damage the roller head, crack the roller head. And it's actually a double bumper. We put a rubber bumper and a plastic stop cap on the end of the double stop. The polycarbonate blade path cover needs to be free from cuts and able to see through to line up your mark with the laser. Check it for blade path. The laser must illuminate the mark on the path of the blade. The clamps on the ECS table want to be able to slide freely on the bars and lock securely when the clamps are engaged. Okay, next we're going to check the extension tables. So either with a long straight board or level or a long square, you just check that the board rolls and all the rollers on the table roll freely. None of the axles are stuck. You want to make sure the roller height is the same as the height of your ECS table on the saw. If that needs to be adjusted, it's the gray legs on the bottom of your extension tables. There's 4 bolts, 2 on either side. They're in slots, and you just extend them up or down to adjust it accordingly. Next, we're going to check the slider assembly. That it slides freely in the slot on the measuring system, and that with the torque of the handle, it locks in place. A lot of the sliders are missing in some of the stores when we go out and check on things, and I think that they're maybe getting pulled off to measure longer pieces. If that's the case, they simply flip up out of the way to measure longer pieces. They don't need to be removed completely off the rail. Next, we'll check the accuracy. So we'll set a length on the measuring system with the viewing lens. We'll put it in the saw, we'll cut it, and then with a manual tape measure, we'll check that piece for accuracy to the scale on the measuring system. If it needs to be adjusted, fine adjustments can be done on the slider itself, the viewing lens, or you can loosen the 2 screws on the sliding stop foot to adjust that accordingly. So we made some revisions to the measuring system. We used to do a 3D printed nut, and they were a little fragile and crack and break on these thin pieces where the clamps to the measuring system. We now use a plastic injection molded nut. So when replacements are available, it's a much sturdier replacement part. In the hardware for the measuring system, roller tables for every saw kit, there's a set of spacers. This is needed to space the measuring system away from the tabletop to get in plane with the fence on the ECS table. They'll go in between the table rail and the measuring system and then lock to the tabletop.